Alright, hello everybody, welcome back to Ruby Star Tournament. After a pretty long time, we're finally getting into the semifinal showcase after a week delay, so sorry about that, but with that we can actually move on into this pool, which I will say is quite interesting, to say the least, but I'll let it speak for itself. But with that, we can move on to our first rice map, which is going to be Nano Love on 1.12 times rate. So this is going to be the speed pick as per usual, and if you are familiar with this map, as it's been used rather quite a few times, this map is definitely a little bit tricky, and it definitely is very continuous. This has been used in quite a few tournaments at least, so definitely a map that some people will at least recognize just a bit. And kind of continuing from what we've been kind of going on, this isn't really going to be your straightforward streams where you can kind of manipulate them easily or kind of just jump throw them or just kind of do whatever you can just to hit them. You're definitely going to have to play this properly, or else you're going to really suffer from a lot of kind of bad accuracy and probably misses. And this is going to clock in at around 350 streams, I believe. This does use kind of a lot of 1.8s, 1.9s, some 1.12s as well, I believe. So definitely really easy to kind of choke on a map like this. And even with kind of some of these break parts like right here, I mean, you don't really get much time to kind of take away from at least this map in particular, just because of how kind of continuous and flowy it is. And also just the fact that there are kind of like bursts of higher snappings, which definitely kind of require you to go a little bit faster at times and kind of slow down. It also is just really truly in general, which, I mean, you kind of expect from a speed map. But we are getting into kind of another kind of quote-unquote break part. But I mean, continuing from here, things aren't really going to slow down. They're more so going to kind of stay the same with kind of more low dumps. Nothing too crazy. I wouldn't say they're as fast as the previous dumps, but they're definitely really challenging. And it's really easy to kind of just miss on any of these sections just because of how continuous and just how straining this map can be in general. I mean, if this doesn't really set up the stage for what to expect within like these later stages, I don't really know what does. I mean, Image Material definitely did have some parts in it where they were quite questionable in terms of difficulty, and this really bumps it up a bit. But let us conclude our speed pick. Moving on to our jump stream, hand stream pick. It is going to be the Battle for Everyone's Soul on 1.2. And you might see the title and think, oh, it's 180 BPM. It can't be that bad. But that's where you're immediately wrong. This map utilizes a lot of 1.6 snappings for the streams, so instead of playing 180 streams, you're actually playing, I believe, 270 streams. So have fun with that. I mean, this starting section starts off with 1.4, but it immediately puts you on the spot for 1.6, and you're going to see a lot of kind of truly kind of motions within this map, which is also going to make this map just really difficult in general. And it is also kind of non-stop. So kind of continuing that trend from Rise 1, where it is just kind of continuous streams without really much of a break. I mean, you can kind of see here, I mean, this map is kind of very broken in nature. It isn't really kind of the same motion. It kind of switches around from where you're hitting. So you definitely do have to be very careful in a map like this one. But kind of moving on into this section, you do get a little bit of a break part. I mean, this is where you really start to see the 1.4s. So, I mean, I guess kind of staying true to that 180 BPM nature, but it doesn't really last for too long. So you definitely do have to be a little bit careful in a session like this one, as you're kind of building up into kind of harder streams. You get a little pause here, but you immediately get thrown back into these 270 streams, kind of mixed in between jump stream and hand stream. A little bit of density, but also a little bit of speed, so you kind of get a little bit of both. Something does test, I'd say, kind of a different skill set when going into jump stream and hand stream maps in general. I mean, you're still gonna kind of see these continuous trills kind of going in between, just because of how tight some of these snappings are. I mean, it's 1/6. You can't really do too much in between. But that is going to conclude Rice 2. Your jump stream management pick. A little bit longer compared to something like Leica, but it definitely is tricky. But moving on to Rice 3, this is going to be a fun map. It's going to be tool assisted speed core on 1.1 times. Yes, that is right, the hardest map in the game. But we finally converted it into tech map, and it is going to be on 1.1 times, and this map is relentless. Anything tech we could think of, this map has. I mean, you already start to see it. You see some graces, you see some really kind of fast streams with a lot of density put into them, making it really uncomfortable to play here, and some even awkward kind of jumps in here as well. Went into a jump part though, you already start to see a lot of mini jacks being put into place. This part being fairly simple, staying on one force, but it is immediately going to kind of change as we kind of move on. You start to see some kind of grace notes as well. And here you go, we start to get into this section, which starts off fairly light, but as we do move on, it is going to get progressively more angry, more trickier. And right here is where you really start to see the anchors be put into place, which brings a lot of kind of discomfort, and these two kind of little speed jack kind of at first. And moving on into this part, I mean, you just see mini jacks. I mean, it's basically a jack section, but it's very kind of unorthodox in its nature. You see these bursts, which I believe are 1/6 bursts into jumps, so you're definitely kind of going into a lot of kind of stop and go motions. And then back into kind of more basic streams with a lot of kind of mini jacks kind of integrated and some bursts as well. This map definitely has everything, and it's definitely a map that I could see that's avoided a lot just for the kind of raw techiness of it and trickiness that it kind of brings. It is rather comfortable in a strange way, but moving on to this section, you do see it kind of differentiates a little bit from the part that was just like this earlier. It is, I believe, 1/6 or 1/8, but no, it's 1/8, but you don't see the jump at the very end, so a little tighter, but a little lighter at the same time. And moving on into this next section, I mean, it's more of these kind of bursts going in between. You do see some kind of staircases in here. A lot of mini jacks as well. And going into this dump. I mean, it's definitely a map that does not let go. And I could definitely see this just being avoided just because of how it is, but that is Rice 3, so have fun with that one. But we can move on to Rice 4, going to be our mixed pick. And it is going to be Croix on 1.075 times. Ignore the name. It's got too lazy to change it, but this map doesn't really step away from the kind of trickiness that these maps have. I mean, you're going to see a lot of kind of mixed patterns in here, but they are going to be pretty tricky as well. And this is kind of more stream focused, so you're not going to really expect too much, but there are kind of some jacks in between to kind of add to the kind of trickiness of this map. A lot of bursts. You do see these kind of trills kind of between these piano parts, which are going to add a little bit of difficulty when trying to control in a map like this one. More so the same thing, but moving on, we do get into this part which starts to slow down a little bit, and you start to see some kind of jump movement here. And with that, that does conclude our fourth rice pick, and we can move on into rice 5, our stamina pick. And this map is rather funny. I'll let the diff name explain, but this was our original stage 6, or our original stage 5. And yes, this is our stamina pick. So, one of the very first, I believe this is the second map to be made within this tournament, so this map's definitely been a long time coming. This is a little bit cut at the beginning. So, originally, we planned this to be our qualifiers raw skill pick, but we did decide very early on that this was really difficult. And this is basically the original with some buffs in between, I believe. There might be some kind of density nerfs, but in general, this is basically what we had in mind originally for Stage 5, or as you see, Stage 6, because originally we didn't have SV. But kind of going into this pick though, it is very stamina intensive, it is very continuous. Originally this was kind of in and out, but we did decide that it didn't really provide much of a strain, so you are going to see some extra jumps and some kind of awkward at times patterns, but they shouldn't be too bad. And yes, this is 260 BPM, so you're definitely going to have a lot of fun with this, but I would say for a map of this speed, it's definitely not the worst. And you do kind of see these kind of breaks, but you do see kind of a lot of kind of dumps first. Like even in these parts, you see a lot of just kind of dumpers in between, which doesn't really give you too much of a break. Which does add a lot to the strain that this map is definitely going to give. I mean, even with some of these kind of ladder sections, you're still kind of going through a lot of these kind of notes throughout. You get a little bit of a 1/3 part, which isn't too bad, but it is kind of going to go and lead back into what you've been kind of experiencing. More of these kind of in and out jump streams, hand streams, some jacks in between. And then going into this part, you're slowly getting into the break part, and here you go. Things are going to calm down a lot more. So if that first half was very difficult, well, you get your kind of time to have a break here, because that's definitely going to be really challenging. And I could definitely see a lot of players just missing within that first section, but I would say the second section is also really tricky, so a map that generally is just very difficult to kind of control, and just has a lot of abrasive patterns, even for just a stamina map. And you do kind of start to get into a little bit of a build-up right here. And you really start to see here. And things definitely do pick up a little bit more here, and they're definitely going to keep picking up here. I mean, this map is relentless, it just keeps going and going. There isn't really any time for breaks. I mean, this was originally meant to pretty much outlie the good players from the less physical ones. And you do see kind of some jumps kind of blurring a little bit, which definitely could be a little bit tricky in terms of accuracy. But this part as well, there's a lot going on in here. It gets a lot more denser, it's a lot more continuous. You do see some bursts in here, which could definitely trip up with your accuracy. But that concludes our stamina pick. Rice 5. Maybe a little bit on the easier side in terms of just scoring, but definitely pretty physical and just long in general. But can move on to Rice 6, which is a pretty funny song. It is going to be Popo on 1.05. This map, it's definitely going to take a lot of a different approach when looking into jacks, just like Res 6 in the last round, you're not going to really see a lot of density, you're more so going to see a lot of speed. I mean, you can kind of see here, you don't really see too much density, it is kind of speedy, but it's not too dense. You do see a little bit of quad stream in here, which you're gonna kind of notice a lot with this map. It is rather trying to play into a little bit of a more comfortable setting. You do see a little bit of quad stream here. And that quad stream burst can be a little bit difficult, but you only have to deal with it once, so it's not too bad. So it is very mini-jacky, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. And this does clock in at 177, so you definitely do want to be a little bit careful, but I mean, if you are this far, this map shouldn't really be much of a problem. It still generally tests most of your kind of jacking skills. You do see kind of a little bit of burst in here, but they don't really alternate too much. It's more kind of just focused on if you can really keep up the kind of consistency throughout. And just kind of go into burst in and out as well. More so the kind of same patterning that you've been seeing earlier, kind of just switching in and out. I mean, this kind of resemble Res 6 from last round, where it wasn't really too dense, but it was more kind of fast, and I guess you could say a little bit tricky. So kind of a little bit quad stream with some jumps in the middle. And just a little bit more, but almost done with this map, or things will start to get a little bit lighter. A little bit of a calmer ending. And a little bit of kind of right-hand bias within that part, but not too bad of a map. Definitely a map that you're going to see scoring be more apparent on. But with this pool, we also have one more Rice map, which is going to be a Rice 7. And this is going to be our second mix pick. This mix pick going to be more focused on jacking. So if you didn't like the last map, well, you do have this map, which is a little bit more fair in terms of scoring. And you might be familiar with the song just being called BPM equals RT, but we do have backslash rack, whatever this is, on 1.05 times. This map was originally uploaded, so you might be somewhat familiar with the patterning, but there are some edits in here. And this is a little bit faster compared to what we originally had. Originally this was supposed to be our chord jack pick, but it did differentiate from typical chord jack with kind of a lot of abrasive patternings, so we did kind of switch up just a little bit. This is also one of the kind of older maps. I do believe this was made sometime around September, so it's definitely been a really long time that this map has been waiting to be used. But you did kind of get your more traditional jacks, more kind of straightforward, and for that reason we did upgrade it by a little bit. It still is pretty tricky, but it shouldn't be that bad. I definitely do see this map being another map that's kind of more higher scores. There are a lot of kind of trickiness to this map, but it shouldn't be too bad. I mean, you do see a lot of kind of your regular jacks were more denser and slightly slower, so if something like Rice 6 wasn't really your kind of jack map, then this is probably the map that you're going to want to go for. And you do start to see kind of more denser jacks being used. You do see some burst as well. Nothing too crazy though. And moving on into this kind of broken jump trill. You do kind of see jump trill going into kind of small, just singular notes. Kind of a reference back into the real beats math in a way. And you do get to this ending, which still does have notes, so don't completely let go. But that does conclude our rice category. Definitely a little bit of a step up, but I do think it is quite enjoyable. But with that, can move on into our LN picks, and moving on to LN1, it is going to be Immortal Flame. It is going to be an edit and cut version made by Nezu. Thank you for giving us permission to edit and cut this, but this is going to be our coordination pick, and this map is also going to be very difficult. This is probably one of the harder maps within the entire pool, so potentially a map that you do want to ban. I mean, starting off with some inverse, nothing crazy, but it is going to kind of speed up just a little bit. You start to see kind of shields in a way, just because of how this map is. And this definitely is a lot more physical compared to something like Home from the last pool, so that is also something to just be really wary of. It is also kind of easier to choke on a map like this just because it is more kind of physical. It is inverse as well, so definitely can be a map where some players want to avoid it completely, while others are going to want to really kind of go into a map like this one. So kind of exiting this inverse part, you do see kind of more straightforward coordination, but still rather tricky. I mean, it definitely does slow down a lot more compared to what we've been seeing earlier, so it definitely does give a little bit of a break, but things still aren't completely easy. I mean, it is semifinals. You have to expect the maps to be pretty tricky regardless of what's happening. And going back into more inverse, definitely can be very tricky, especially that transition going from kind of a regular kind of bursty LNs into kind of more inversey, kind of dreamy in a way, if you kind of take out all the LNs. But you do get a little bit of a break here, so a little bit of time to kind of recover the stamina that you're probably going to be using, especially just because of hold strain being really apparent. And you have kind of a little bit more trickier inverse sections, not really too straightforward, kind of three-handed, which can, I mean, three lane, which definitely can be very tricky to kind of coordinate, but it does kind of go back into a more inverse that we've been seeing. It is a little bit lengthy, but it's not too bad. But that does conclude our first LN pick. It's definitely very tricky, but it's gonna be interesting to see if this gets played, just because I would say this map is a lot harder compared to our other LN picks, but I guess we could let that be decided amongst the players. But we can move on into LN2, which is going to be The Daybreak Will Never Come Again on 1.125 times. So this was originally used for AMM as a qualifiers map, but this lot decided that we should reuse this, because why not? So we are using this at a much higher rate. Also gives us more citrus, which is always fun to see. And this is our density pick, so a lot more simpler LNs. Nothing too crazy, but it is quite fast. And you can see from the title, but this does clock in at 225 BPM, so it's definitely a lot faster compared to what we've been seeing earlier, but I would say this map is fairly lighter. It is also kind of more simple and continuous, so it definitely shouldn't be too bad in terms of scoring. Now moving on to get into this break part. Rather kind of simpler part, but it is gonna kind of immediately go back into the density that you're kind of used to. More so just the same thing we've been testing. I mean, it is kind of your traditional density map. And this ending right here, I would say maybe a little bit burstier compared to earlier, but it's nothing too crazy. Then you get this part, which basically brings you to the end. That does conclude LN2, our density pick. A bit fast, but I would say fairly light. But with that, can move on to LN3, which is going to be our technical LN, and it is going to be Shiver. This map is definitely something. I mean, I'll let it speak for itself, but this isn't the most physical. I mean, I would say this is the least physical. Very easy to choke, and it's full of so many different kind of LN releases. I mean, it starts out fairly simple, but you're immediately going to kind of build up into a little bit of a later section. Right here, where density really starts to pick up just a little bit. It's nothing really too crazy, but as we do move on, things are definitely going to pick up a lot more. And then right here, density picks up just a little bit more, balance become a lot more continuous, and you have all these different releases, which you definitely have to be really careful of. And you do kind of have some kind of hold strain also being introduced. Density picks up once more, just a little bit here. And you're going to start to see some bursts right here, which are going to be really tricky to kind of coordinate and just kind of hit on time. They're very easy to choke on these. But that basically concludes the kind of hard parts within this map. Definitely a really tricky one in terms of accuracy. In terms of physicality though, this is probably really light. It's definitely kind of a switch up compared to something like LN1 and potentially LN2. But that does conclude our third best pick, LN pick. And with that, can move on into our new Ellen pick, which is going to be our mixed Ellen. I mean, an Ellen 4. It's going to be Summer met with a meteor on 1.1 times. Alright, hello, sorry about that. But we are in Hybrid 1, our Jack-based hybrid. This map is fairly easy to choke. We originally were thinking of using this on 1.05 times, but we did decide that base rate was fine enough. So this might be a little bit on the easier side in terms of all the maps, but doesn't take away from the kind of trickiness and how easy it is to choke a map like this one. So hopefully that does kind of bring some balance at least. And like I said, this isn't a custom, so another kind of non-custom. But we do kind of see these jacks going in and out. Nothing too crazy, but definitely really easy to kind of just choke on. But that does conclude our first hybrid. And with that, we can go into our second hybrid. It's going to be our stream-based hybrid. And it is going to be a cut version of Pixel Heart on 1.2 times. So I do think this is a bit of a newer song in terms of just real beat stuff. But it isn't anything too crazy. This map was originally meant to be our third hybrid, our technical hybrid, but we did do some edits. So it is kind of more stream-based. It doesn't have as many mini jacks as it previously did, but I would say this map is still rather tricky in terms of its nature. There are definitely a lot of parts which can be pretty easy to choke on. Originally we were going to use this on 1.25, but we did decide that that was a bit too hard, so we settled for 1.2. You get a little bit kind of break section right here with some kind of streams in between these elements. This beginning being kind of more straightforward, but as we do kind of proceed into the second half, things are going to get a bit more bursty. You get a little bit of a build up here. But down here you can see a lot more burst, these elements being integrated with 1/6 burst. So it's definitely a bit on the faster side. It can definitely be really easy to choke on these, especially with the kind of not mini jacking, but almost anchory feeling that some of these parts can kind of give off. It is kind of in and out, so you have to be careful with that, especially this next part. And this map kind of just continued on to the very end. But that does conclude our second hybrid, and can move on to our third hybrid, which is going to be our technical one. And it is going to be Exit This Earth's Atomosphere, the 200-step remix. This map also being another non-custom, but this map is very enjoyable. I definitely can see this being avoided just because of the patterning, but I would say this is probably one of the more enjoyable maps. And it is on 1.05 times, so nothing too crazy. I mean, you start off with these kind of more tricky LNs, but nothing too crazy. But you do start to see the build up here, and things are going to get a little bit faster and trickier as well, so you definitely do have to be really careful. This part still being rather simple, but things will definitely build up as we kind of move on. And you start to see those bursts right there, which definitely kind of lay out the groundwork for kind of what to expect in a map like this one. And here you go, start to see a lot of mini jacks being used. More so same thing. Do get almost like a break part, but not really. Things build up just a little bit more. You start to see a lot more kind of pervasive mini jab. Some uncomfortable ones as well. So it definitely does kind of test a lot within a kind of technical aspect. And then you do get this part, which basically serves as your main break before things really start to build up once again. I mean, I would say this pick is rather short compared to a lot of these other picks, but it is very fast, which I do think kind of brings the enjoyability to this map at least. And then going back into this, get more of this kind of jump shows into streams, which can be a little bit easy to choke on if you aren't careful. This part right here is also very tricky. It's still rather enjoyable, but it's just really tricky. And it can be really easy to choke on a map like this one at least. And continue on. I mean, you can see it's almost over, but still, this map still just continues and continues. This part also right here could be easy to choke on, but that does conclude our technical hybrid and our hybrid category. But with that, we can finally move on to everyone's favorite category, SV, and with semifinals, we are moving into more memory-focused SV, so it's definitely going to be a bit of a step back, but it is going to be Say It Back by Promonchos. This map is really fun, but it is really tricky. And yes, you are going to see reverse SVs already. It doesn't last for too long, but you definitely can see it. It's not being really tricky. A lot of kind of rhythm memory in a way. There's kind of raw memory, but a lot of it is kind of just remembering how this song goes. Get this part, which kind of fast jam memory in a way. It's not too complicated, it is rather simple, but you do have to be a little bit careful, have a little bit fast reaction time. And this next part, more so being the same thing, you do have to be careful with that kind of LN as well. This part is really kind of rhythm memory, as it's not that straightforward. A lot of these snappings being kind of awkward. And you get this memory part, which is very self-explanatory if you kind of pay attention. So right here, you see these LN kind of patterning, which is basically the same thing, you just have to repeat it. And more so kind of more of this kind of awkward rhythms in a way. Slow jams, which aren't too bad. This next one here could be a little bit tricky, but it's nothing too crazy. And coming up, another memory part. It's nothing too heavy, it is fairly simple, but you do have to be kind of wary that it does exist, or else you'll be probably caught off guard. And kind of up here, more of so this kind of weird kind of snappings, which really doesn't make the map straightforward to play at all. You definitely do have to be very wary of that, kind of study the song in a way. More so the same thing, just kind of awkward snappings rather than simplicity. And kind of small memory right there. And I mean, this kind of weird rhythms, it does kind of continue, but moving on to this part, more so simplicity, kind of like the beginning. And a little bit of a slow jam right there, because of course it is an SV without a funny slow jam. And a little bit of a funny LN slow jam. But that does conclude our SV pick, and of course there's always the bounty within this map. Still haven't seen one for Good Tech yet, so Good Tech and this one are open now, so good luck with that. But with that, we can move on to the tiebreaker. And this one I'm very excited about. It is going to be the Silent Room Collection. This is a collab between Livium, Chu, Haimitsu, and I. And this map is a very, very old one. This was probably one of the first tiebreakers we worked on, besides tool-assisted speed court. And yes, tool-assisted speed court Rice 3 was originally meant to be our tiebreaker for quarterfinals. So basically 2 tiebreakers, almost. But this map is basically a reprise of the original version. And it is very different, and it does play a lot better, but it is still very tricky. And you start off somewhat in an easier section, but you're immediately being put into dumps right here. It starts off fairly light, and it progressively builds up so that you're more comfortable kind of transitioning into these dumps. Maybe you get this part, which does get a little bit dense at the end, but I do think it should be fairly manageable, especially for the players kind of going into this. And moving on to a little bit of a more rice section. A lot of kind of mini jacks being put into here, kind of abrasive, kind of similar to how Rice 6 uses jacks, but moving on to a bit of a more kind of technical hybrid here. A lot of kind of tricky patterning. You definitely do have to be really careful with a map like this, kind of just transitioning in and out of really different patterns. I mean, it is a mashup, the songs are completely different, but I would say in that sense, it does add a little bit to the difficulty as well. And going back into another race section, you do see kind of some of these Ellens kind of be put into place. Nothing too crazy though. It does have a lot of a more stronger focus into the rice aspect, so definitely can provide a little bit of a challenge, especially with these kind of speed jacks coming in. And moving on to this section, which plays more so like a jack hybrid in a way, with some kind of burst in between, but it's nothing too crazy. And you get a little bit of a break here. It's nothing too crazy, but still is a bit of a break. But once that break is over, you're immediately being put into these kind of really dumpy patterns. Then going into a bit of more kind of streamy hybrid, which does kind of transition into shafts. Which then goes on into this really difficult Ellen part. Basically tech and coordination at the same time. And it does have a lot of kind of reverse shields and some shields as well, so definitely very tricky in terms of just playing in general. Not only in terms of accuracy, but in terms of combo. And moving on to this part, it's going to be more of a hybrid as well. Still kind of laying on into that kind of trickiness that we've been seeing. And that kind of burst at the end, but then moves on into basically the last part. And even with this ending, it isn't completely simple. You are going to see some kind of patterning in here. You have to be slightly careful. Definitely is possible to miss on a session like this one. Unlikely, but still very possible. But that will conclude Tiebreaker, our first mashup, potentially hinting at what's to come. But that does conclude the Mappol showcase. Quite an interesting one at that, I would say. but it definitely does add a lot of variety within these pools, so hopefully it was worth the wait. But who knows? Schedules, whatnot, will be out shortly. Mappol also out shortly, so with that, concludes this stream. So we'll be seeing you within the matches. See ya.